Something I have done on the channel over the last 3 years is talk about winners and losers from week 1 of college football. Just like you guys, I watched pretty much every single game this weekend and followed all the major storylines, and there truly were some huge winners and some absolutely huge losers. In today's video, we're going to do exactly that. I'm going to talk about 10 teams or players that absolutely won week 1 and 10 teams or players that absolutely folded in week 1. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about some winners and losers from week 1 of the college football season. Okay, so honestly my biggest winner from week 1 has to be the Miami Hurricanes. Everybody has been clowning the Canes over the last few decades for not being able to get over the hump and always being a pretender. They went out and bought 2 incredible skill players in Cam Ward and Damian Martinez, and both of those guys showed out immediately. Their first game was going to be on the road in the Swamp against their rival Florida, and in this game they absolutely dominated. They ended up beating the Gators 41-17, and the game was never close. Cam Ward ended up putting up 385 yards and 3 touchdowns and played with a ridiculous amount of swag. Damian Martinez ran the ball 15 times for 65 yards, and Xavier Restrepo proved he was one of the best receivers in the country, catching 7 passes for 112 yards and a touchdown. Florida looked absolutely lost in every single way. Miami was firing on all cylinders, and the Canes look like they are the best team in the ACC right now. They are a huge week 1 winner. Okay, so my first loser for today's video is going to be the Minnesota Golden Gophers. PJ Fleck has been known to be building a strong program at Minnesota, but last year they ended up missing a bowl game, and they were expecting him to bounce back right away. He went out and got an insane transfer at quarterback in Max Brosmer, who is one of the best players in the FCS, and brought in a couple of big weapons at the running back spot, but ultimately Minnesota was not able to get the job done. Despite North Carolina losing Max Johnson to a season-ending injury, the Tar Heels hit a late field goal, and then Minnesota got themselves in field goal range. In front of a nearly sold-out crowd, he ended up shanking the field goal right, and Minnesota lost 19-17. They start out the season 0-1, and it looks like PJ Fleck is going to have his work cut out for him. I don't exactly think North Carolina is an elite team, and this was a game that they needed to win and could have been a huge statement for them. Unfortunately though, they'll go down as a loser. Okay, so my next winner is Hudson Card, the quarterback for Purdue. At one point he was a 5-star recruit in the future of Texas football, but after becoming just somewhat of a backup and somewhat of a disappointment, Card would transfer to Purdue, where last year, honestly, he really wasn't that good. He was extremely inefficient, made a lot of dumb decisions, and Purdue did not make a bowl game. This year though, it looks like Card is going to be a little bit different. He was graded as one of the top 6 quarterbacks in college football by PFF this weekend, and against Indiana State, he went 24 of 25 for 273 yards and 4 touchdowns. He just had 1 drop pass, and if not, he could have gone literally 25 of 25. Hudson Card played a near perfect game, and it looks like he understands the offense, and Purdue could be in for a bounce back season. Honestly, good for Hudson Card. He comes out of this weekend as a winner. My next loser is going to be Virginia Tech football. Coming into the year, they were given dark horse playoff hype as they returned pretty much every starter from last year's team, had a really solid quarterback, and it looked like they had a favorable schedule to potentially win 10, 11, or even 12 games. Unfortunately though, Virginia Tech was caught sleepwalking against Vanderbilt as Brent Pry and Diego Pavia pulled a fast one and ended up getting out to a 17-0 lead. While Virginia Tech would come back, ultimately the game would go to overtime after a missed Vanderbilt field goal, and then Pavia would take it into the end zone, Colin Schlee would throw the ball out of the back of the end zone, and the Hokies lost in overtime. This was an extremely pathetic performance by Virginia Tech, as they are considered one of the top 4 teams in the ACC, and they have already gone down. While their special season isn't over quite yet, it is in trouble, and they are a big loser from week 1. My next winner is Ole Miss quarterback Jackson Dart. After becoming a blue chip recruit and spending 1 year at USC, Dart has dominated for the Ole Miss Rebels over the last 2 years, but many thought he was somewhat underrated and would not be able to take that next step. Now, it looks like after week 1, Jackson Dart is probably the frontrunner for the Heisman Trophy. This feels similar to Matt Corral a couple of years ago, but Dart threw for 418 yards and 5 touchdowns and was given a 97.3 QBR. He was listed as one of the most efficient and best performing quarterbacks from week 1 and showed that he is going to be a force this year and that he could potentially play his way into the top 10 of the draft. Dart's a legit Heisman contender in my eyes and is probably the best quarterback in college football right now. That's just my opinion though. My next loser is Texas Tech. A lot of people have been high on what Joey McGuire has been doing at Texas Tech, and many expected them to take the next step this season. Unfortunately, week 1 did not really show much hope for me. they ended up playing Abilene Christian at home. And while Abilene Christian may not be the worst FCS team to ever exist, they really should not be pushing Texas Tech around. The game went back and forth all night, and despite 4 touchdowns from Baron Morton, they just couldn't get away from the pesky Abilene Christian team. Ultimately, Abilene would score a field goal with just 5 seconds remaining, and the game would go to overtime. Baron Morton found Caleb Douglas for a touchdown, and then Abilene Christian would run for a touchdown and not get the 2-point conversion. Texas Tech survived 52-51, and while they're 1-0, they ended up embarrassing themselves, and in my eyes, they are a loser from week 1. My next winner is UNLV football. Everyone thought that they were a fluke after last season. Barry Odom and Jaden Mayava ended up proving that UNLV was a better team in the Mountain West last year, and some thought they would just take a major step back in year 2. Mayava ended up transferring to USC, and while they returned Ricky White, no one really cared about UNLV. Well, now they do, as UNLV went on the road to play against Houston, a Big 12 team, and really spoiled Willie Fritz's debut. UNLV ended up winning 27-7, and the game was literally never close. New quarterback Matthew Sluka ended up throwing for 2 touchdowns, and UNLV didn't even have to do that much, to be honest. Quarterback Donovan Smith struggled horrifically for Houston, and it looks like UNLV is a really solid team, and Houston's in big trouble. This is big for the Runnin' Rebels, as they're hoping to be one of those teams that could maybe compete for that last college football playoff spot. I don't know if there's a single player who lost half of his stock in one weekend more than Connor Weigman. After becoming a 5-star recruit, Weigman has struggled with injuries over the last 2 years. Still though, scouts saw him as a future NFL quarterback, as recent mock drafts had him going in the top 10. Weigman was given a ridiculous amount of hype going into the season, but in week 1 against Notre Dame, he struggled horrifically. Honestly, struggled is an understatement. He went 12 of 30 and had 2 horrible interceptions. He could just never get anything going for the Aggies, and Connor Weigman both threw away the game and threw away his draft stock. While there is room for one blemish on his resume, Weigman needs to figure it out quick, or he may not even be the starter in a couple of weeks. That is how bad he looked in week 1. My next big winner from week 1 is the USC Trojans. As they have now moved on to the Big Ten, USC was told they weren't going to be able to compete. They lost Caleb Williams, they ended last year poorly, and many thought that Lincoln Riley had met his match. Instead though, their new quarterback Miller Moss ended up playing terrifically, and they matched up with number 13 LSU in week 1. LSU's woes of losing on Sunday night continued, as Miller Moss ended up leading it on the field, and Woody Marks had a 13-yard touchdown run with 8 seconds remaining. USC won 27-20, and this was a huge victory for the Big Ten and for the Trojans. They proved that they're still one of the top-tier programs, and that they're not to be forgotten. USC still has an uphill path to making the playoff, but the Trojans look to be on a good path, and they are a winner from week 1 in my eyes. There may not have been a bigger loser from week 1 than the Clemson Tigers. The trajectory of Dabo Swinney's program has been going down over the last few years, and after not reaching 10 wins for the first time since 2010 last year, the Tigers were hoping to bounce back in a big way. Cade Klubnik was back, they had a healthy receiving core, and many expected them to at least compete with Georgia. Instead, that was not the case, as Georgia won 34-3, could have put up a lot more points, and the Clemson offense looked terrible. Dabo Swinney's face was practically green during most of that second half, and honestly I feel bad for Clemson at this point. They're falling back to their old reputation of a team that could not get over the hump, and Clemson has a lot to figure out, as they play App State this week, who will definitely want to take advantage of them, and put them at 0-2. For now though, Clemson is a week 1 loser though. There was no receiver who was a bigger winner in week 1 than Tetaroa McMillan. After becoming a 5-star recruit, McMillan would flip from Oregon to Arizona and play for head coach Jed Fish. The last 2 years have been terrific for Tetaroa, as he caught over 100 combined passes for nearly 2,000 yards and 20 touchdowns in these last 2 years. He was projected as a top 15 draft pick going into 2024, and McMillan just proved that he could be the top name in this year's draft class. At 6'5", he ended up catching 10 passes for 304 yards and 4 touchdowns, averaging nearly 31 yards per catch. That is absolutely insane, and McMillan has already put up better stats in one game than a lot of receivers have in just one whole season. McMillan is a huge winner, and right now behind Luther Burden, I'd say he's the second best receiver in the country, but he could be coming for that title as well. One of the storylines I heard about all offseason was about how West Virginia was finally going to get over the hump. They finished last year strong, and Neil Brown finally had enough experience to put out a West Virginia team that could win the Big 12. They'd end up facing off at number 8 Penn State in week 1, and behind a super rowdy crowd, I thought this game was going to be close. The odds makers had it as a 1-touchdown game, but honestly, West Virginia completely laid an egg. They ended up losing 34-12, and while the rain delay didn't help, West Virginia wasn't going to win this game in any type of weather. Their offense couldn't get going, their defense eventually could not stop Penn State, and honestly the energy just wasn't there. Is Neil Brown going to be the head coach at West Virginia next year? That I don't know, but for now, they are a huge loser from week 1 and really have to regroup and fix things. Our next huge winner is running back Ashton Jeanty from Boise State. After coming out of Jacksonville, Jeanty took over the college football world last year as he ended up running for nearly 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns, while also catching nearly 600 yards and 5 scores out of the air. Instead of going into the portal where he could have gone to a bigger program, Jeanty would end up coming back to Boise State. In week 1, he went absolutely crazy. In a game that should not have been close against Georgia Southern, Jeanty ended up running the ball 20 times for 267 yards and 6 touchdowns. That was absolutely insane, as he truly put Boise State on his back, and right now is a Heisman contender and the best running back in the sport. We'll have to wait and see if he can continue this level of success, but Jeanty is proving that he is a superstar in the making, and a lot of people thought he was the most underrated player in the country, and he proved that in week 1 by becoming a huge winner. My next loser is Dillon Gabriel. In week 1, the Oregon Ducks would play against Idaho, and the number 3 ranked Ducks were expected to win this game by a mile. Unfortunately though, they really could not get much going, as it took a late touchdown in order for them to put away Idaho. Oregon really struggled, and for a little while Dillon Gabriel did as well. He ended up throwing for 380 yards and 2 touchdowns, but for a guy who has 6 years of experience, is supposed to be an NFL player, and had the number 1 Heisman odds, he did not do a lot to help that this week. He struggled against an FCS school, and I've been saying for a long time that I thought he was the most overrated player in college football, and it seems like a lot of people have said that as well, but for now, he's a loser from week 1, as that is going to be a huge blemish to his Heisman resume, and it worries me for their next few games. My next winner is the Georgia Bulldogs. I know they're the number 1 team in the country, and I know they're expected to be this good, but Georgia is once again proving that they can just plug players into the team and everything works out. Despite losing a couple of receivers and practically their whole running back room, Georgia had guys step up, Carson Beck looked terrific, the defense was great, and they killed Clemson 34-3. Georgia and Kirby Smart are once again rolling, and are proving why they are the best program in college football right now. Georgia is a huge winner for their giant victory in week 1, and it looks like they have all the momentum in the world to potentially go undefeated once again. Their schedule is ridiculously difficult though, and we'll have to wait and see, but for now though, Georgia continues to be a winner. Houston had a couple of good seasons. I remember when Tom Herman was there, and Houston was looking like the next great Group of 5 program. Flash forward a few years, and Houston ended up firing Dana Holgorsen, but he did at least get them to the Big 12. Unfortunately for them though, they ended up having a terrible week 1 game. After hiring Willie Fritz away from Tulane, they just laid an egg, losing 27-7 to a UNLV team at home. The game was never competitive, Donovan Smith looked terrible, and Houston fans were shell-shocked. Houston can be in for a long and dark season in the Big 12 if they don't figure this out soon, and for now, they are a huge loser from week 1. The 2 most scrutinized quarterbacks going into the 2024 season were Drew Allar and Cade Klubnik. They're high-profile players playing for high-profile programs, and many thought that Drew Allar and Cade Klubnik were in over their heads. While Cade Klubnik was terrible in week 1 against Georgia, Drew Allar proved that he still has it in him. Under their new OC from Kansas, Drew Allar would throw for 216 yards with 3 touchdowns and no interceptions, and also had a 98.3 QBR. He led them to a victory against a rival in a hostile territory in West Virginia, and Allar looked smooth, it looked like he was picking up the system, and it looks like he could have a huge year. Drew Allar had a lot of dirt being thrown at him, but right now he's a big winner from week 1 and could have a huge season. There was no bigger loser in week 1 than Florida. Everyone knew that Billy Napier was on the hot seat and that they had the hardest schedule in college football this year, but in week 1 against Miami at home, they looked absolutely terrible. Graham Mertz did not progress at all, the offensive line was terrible, they couldn't get anything going, and Miami did whatever they wanted. They lost 41-17 at home, the fans were silent for half of the game, and it was epitomized by Graham Mertz getting hurt, and are a long way away from competing for SEC championships and national championships. That's where the Gators program expects to be, and for now it looks like DJ Lagway could be their only hope. He's the number 1 quarterback recruit in the class of 2024, and with Mertz being banged up, Lagway could start, and he could change things, but for now I think Florida has a huge culture problem, and no one's on the hot seat more than Billy Napier. I thought Napier was the next big thing coming out of Louisiana Lafayette, but he's ended up proving that he was a dud, and this is terrible for Florida, and they're in a bad spot. For our final winner, we have to talk about Vanderbilt. They are routinely the laughingstock of the SEC, and no one takes them seriously. They're a free win on anyone's schedule, but every once in a while they upset a team. In week 1, they ended up beating Virginia Tech, who was a dark horse playoff contender, and they won that game 34-27 in overtime. Despite most of their stadium being filled with maroon and orange, the Commodores ended up fighting as hard as they could, and Diego Pavia led them to a 34-27 victory, and he had the game-winning touchdown. Clark Lee is trying to build something at Vanderbilt, and he's trying to do that by flipping the roster, and despite all those new players, it could be a new look for Vanderbilt this year. I don't think they're going to do anything special, but a bowl game could potentially be in reach if they play like this every week, and they were a huge winner for coming out 1-0 and beating a really solid opponent. Honestly, good for Vandy. Finally, our last loser for the college football week 1 was LSU. They seem to always play these Sunday night games, and the last 2 years they've lost in heartbreaking ways. They got blown out by Florida State last year, and then the year before they had their extra point blocked after a crazy last-second touchdown. LSU was hoping to change those woes with a new quarterback and playing a different team, but instead nothing ended up changing. While Garrett Nussmeier was decent last night, he proved that there's still a long way to go for this offense, and LSU ended up folding once again late. After scoring a late field goal, they let USC go down the field and eventually score a game-winning touchdown. They then threw a pick on the very next play, and LSU lost their 3rd straight Sunday night game and are already behind the 8 ball in terms of competing for the playoff. A lot of people think Brian Kelly is extremely overrated, and I think LSU's lost 4 of their 5 last games to ranked opponents. They were a huge loser from week 1, but luckily they probably have the talent and ability to bounce back. Still though, the SEC is extremely difficult, and this was a big loss for them. But what do you guys think? Who were some winners and losers I missed from today's video? What are your thoughts on week 1, and what topic should I cover this week? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.